morning, good afternoon, or good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Karen, and I'll be presenting on the discussion part for my group's presentation. I'll be giving interpretations for the results that were gone through earlier, and towards the end, I'll be talking about the implications of our study as well as the limitations of our study. The first variable that we'll be looking at is the measure of positive effect, where we found actually no significant effect for Kiasuism, relevance, and no interaction effect as well. We think that this is probably because, in the first place, the referent is already controlled to be close to the participant. So since the participant is already close to the referent, he or she would probably naturally have positive effect for the referent in spite of the level of Kiasuism and relevance conditions. That means whether they are Kiasu or not, and whether the referent is from their department or not, the fact that they are still close to a person meant that they already have positive effect for that person. Therefore, the level of positive effect does not actually differ across the conditions. Okay, for the next variable, negative effect, we found that there was actually a significant effect of Kiasuism on negative effect, such that if the participant was high in Kiasuism, he would have a higher level of negative effect towards the reference. And this shows that people who are high in Kiasuism will tend to feel conflicting emotions towards a high-performing colleague whom they are close to, because in addition to the positive effect that they feel towards the person, they would also feel negative effect as well. And this might be because Kiasuism stimulates competitiveness in them, and this competitiveness is linked to feelings of jealousy, as already found from a previous study. Our study also found that relevance had a significant effect on negative effect as well, such that if the referent was from the same department as the participant would have a higher level of negative effect towards the referent. And this is consistent with what has already been found in the SEM model, whereby negative effect is related to social comparison. In fact, a study by Tesla and Collins found that relevance could actually predict emotions such as jealousy and envy in participants mentioned earlier. And hence, this proves that being in the same department can actually increase the relevance of the reference performance to the participant. We also found that there was an significant interaction effect, such that the effect that relevance has on negative effect is much stronger in the high Kiasu condition than the condition. This means that among highly Kiasu people, those who belong to the high relevance condition score higher in negative effect than those who belong to the low relevance condition. And the difference between the two is actually really great. However, among not that Kiasu people, that means people in the low Kiasuism condition, those who belong to the high relevance condition score higher in negative effect than those who belong to the low relevance condition, but the difference is not as great as compared to the high Kiasuism condition. So this is actually consistent with what we predicted in our hypothesis, where we felt that Kiasu people would respond with more extreme measures compared to less Kiasu people in the face of threat. However, we found upon subsetting the data that the above results, that is, the significant effect of Kiasuism, relevance, as well as the interaction effect, only hold true for females. And this may be attributed to the fact that for females, their maintenance of self-worth depends more on interpersonal factors and guides, and this actually puts them at risk for depression. They are more relational, so it's more important for them that others like them, think well of them, etc. And all this usually has to do with how well they perform. Since our study at SEM is related to performance, which can be linked to relational outcomes and therefore their self-worth, the Kiasuism relevant conditions will probably have a stronger impact on them. And another study has also found that a highly competitive environment may actually prove more challenging for women. Okay, next we move on to talking about whether Kiasuism has an effect on participants' willingness to work with the referent. So we actually found that Kiasuism has no effect because the Kiasu person may find both good and negative aspects of working with a high-performing colleague. In fact, one study found that the quality of one's colleagues significantly affects one's ability to maintain one's performance, and top performers rely on high-quality colleagues to improve the quality of their work. So, a Kiasu person may recognize that working with a high-performing colleague could help them to be more motivated and learn to do better, so there's something for them to gain. However, the downside is that they may end up looking bad against the high-performing colleague, and this might affect others' opinion of them and cause them to lose out. So both the good and bad perspectives cancel each other out, and Kiasuism has no effect on willingness to work with the referent. We also found that, consistent with the SEM model, relevance was actually a significant condition as to whether participants was willing to work with the referent. So we realized that this variable willingness to work might actually be a rather valid or accurate measure of social comparison. And we think that the reason why relevance could be significant was because it increases feelings of threat. This is because others are more likely to compare the participants' performance to a reference performance since they are from the same department and more or less working on the same task. So the participants' performance will be contrasted against the high-performing referent, and this may lead others to form a negative evaluation of them. Moreover, they might be induced to compare themselves to referent and feel lousy about themselves if they do not perform well. And we also found no interaction effect between Kiasuism and relevance for this variable. We also found that the results for relevance was only true for females, and we have already stated the reason why when we talk about negative effect just now. The reason is because they are more threatened by social comparison because they are more vulnerable to others' approval. Okay, for the next variable, measuring how much the participant likes the reference, we found that there was no effect at all for all the conditions, including no interaction effect. And we feel that this is similar to results for positive effect, in the sense that the participant was probably already close to the reference. That's why the participant likes the reference, in spite of the existing levels of Kiasuism and the condition of relevance that they were in. So in this case, we feel that feelings of like is probably not a very good measure of social comparison. Okay, then for our final variable about how willing the participant is to help the referent, we found that Kiasuism actually had a significant effect such that if they are high in Kiasuism, they are probably less willing to help the referent. And this is probably quite understandable, as Kiasuism tends to cause them to have this fear of losing out, selfishness, and calculativeness. We also found that relevance had a significant effect as well, which is again consistent with the SEM model. So willingness to help may actually be a rather accurate and valid measure of social comparison. And we probably found this to be a significant effect because the element of competitiveness is probably more announced when dealing with a colleague from the same department. And that's why the participant may be more concerned about the gains and losses they will get from helping the referent. Since the referent may be seen as a rival, it does not make sense for them to help the referent perform better at their own expense. We also found no interaction effect, though the results were in the predicted direction. And we found that the Kiasuism condition is only significant for females and not males, while the relevance condition was only significant for males and not females. And for this, we realized that it could be because males score higher on the trait competing to win, which is to dominate others. There's actually a study done on this, where looking at trait competitiveness in late adolescence, and we found that males were higher on the trait competing to win. So males may be less likely to help someone from their same department as they want to be the one dominating their department. Furthermore, competing to win was associated with greater depression and loneliness, and with fewer friendships for females. Since friendships are important to females, they would want to help someone in the same department as them. That's why relevance may not have affected their willingness to help the referent. Okay, our overall conclusions are that in addition to negative effect, willingness to help and willingness to work with and to help the referent may be measures that reflect social comparison. Positive effect and feelings of like may not be. And to summarize, Kiasuism has an effect on social comparison as measured by negative effect and willingness to help, while the impact of relevance on social comparison is validated as measured by how it was significant for the variables negative effect, willingness to work with, and willingness to help. And overall, females are more prone to effects of social comparison compared to males. So what implications are there from our study? It's quite obvious that Kiasuism does stimulate competitiveness and lead to certain negative outcomes like negative effect and unwillingness to help, which can decrease the productivity of the work group and lead to not very good outcomes for the organization. And we actually found that a study stated that a competitive climate leads to stress for workers and lower job satisfaction, organizational commitment, and job dedication for those low in trait competitiveness. So if people who are low in competitiveness find themselves surrounded by overly competitive people or people who are too kiasu, they'll probably not perform well. And competitive climate leads to increased stress levels for workers, which has already been shown in our study, where we realized that kiasu people felt more negative effect towards their co-workers. So we can see that having too many kiasu people in your company may result in a very negative environment, and the less kiasu people who may actually be good workers may end up feeling antagonized and dissatisfied with their job and workplace. So what managers can do is to try to curb the effects of Kiasuism by stimulating a cooperative environment and rewarding benevolent behaviors. They can also try to avoid a Kiasu culture in their company by not hiring too many Kiasu people through administering the Kiasuism scale during the process of selection. But this, whether to hire Kiasu people or not, depends on whether the job is competitive in nature and whether people working in the job need to have a competitive nature. Because if the job is meant to be competitive, then it would make sense to hire Kiasu people. And previous research has also shown that people who are high in competitiveness or Kiasuism do not suffer that badly from a competitive environment, and they may even thrive in it. Okay, so now we are going to touch on a few limitations of our study. The first one is the fact that we use the median split to separate participants in high and low Kiasu conditions for ANOVA. So the thing is, by using a median split, the scores that we have in the high and low conditions are not extreme scores of the population. So they may not be an accurate reflection of both high and low, and they may actually have decreased the power that was in our study. Power as in the ability for us to detect significant effects. Another limitation is that we used a rather small sample size of just 80 participants. Again, this might have decreased the power of our study, and which leads to low internal validity. And the small sample size also means that it's less representative and generalizable, so it leads to low external validity. The use of convenience sampling also affects the representativeness of our sample, as well as it affects the representativeness of our sample because our sample was not very representative in many aspects, even though genders were quite evenly mixed in the sense that there was about an equal number of females and males, but the age range was really huge and thus not evenly represented, and the industries that the participants were working in were not specified as well. So we can also say that our sample was not very specific enough on the characteristics. Therefore, we can't really profile them to say that, okay, they belong to this age group or they belong to a certain industry. We can't profile them in this manner for us to make generalization to other samples with somewhat similar characteristics. So this also means that our study has low generalizability, so it has low external validity. The last limitation is probably the fact that our Kiasuism scale use was non-validated. This is actually a modified Kiasuism scale. We just selected items which we felt were relevant to our study from this larger Kiasuism scale that we had initially. And because of this, the scale is not something that has been validated before. It might have been not as comprehensive as the actual one and might have captured less effects and decreased the power in our study. Okay, that's all for our presentation, and thank you for listening all the way. We hope that you'll give us a favorable critique. Thank you.